Good evening. How's everybody doing? If you're fasting and you're still fasting, I hope you're hanging in there. As soon as this class ends, I'm on my way to the afternoon service, Mincha Minyan, and then I will have a Torah reading, and then evening service, and then I'll be able to break the fast. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Bill in Missouri, Nancy, North Carolina, Yehud in South Carolina, Guy in Ohio, Bella in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Shandora in the Bronx, Paula in the Great Northwest, Melissa in Great Neck, Lucy in Minnesota, Leona in Illinois, Sharon in New Jersey, Karen in Northern California, Belle in Texas, Chaim in Florida, Marjorie in Georgia, Aoife in Florida, Ella, Debbie in New Jersey, Lanit in Silver Springs, Spencer in Connecticut. Welcome, everybody. Let's get busy. Our daf today is page 106 here in Tractate Bava Basra, the 23rd volume of the Talmud. Continuing our journey through chapter 7. We're actually close to the end of it. And today, God willing, we'll open and I believe complete. We won't complete. But we'll get thoroughly into Mishnah number 4 here in chapter 7. Mishnah 4, right at the top of 106. If one sells a field to another, telling him that he is selling him a field, measuring a base core, this amount of land that we've been talking about repeatedly in this chapter, this time the added stipulation is I'm selling you a base core with its particular demarcations and borders. In other words, I'm showing you the piece of land, and it runs from here to there, from this corner of the fence to that rock to this stream. I'm showing you exactly what the piece of land is. It is demarcated. It's about a base core in size, but in this case, I'm showing you exactly what the piece of land is and what its measurements are, where it sits, the whole thing. So the seller specifies these demarcations for the buyer. In this case, the field's measurement, calling it a base core, is not treated as as exacting a manner as in a standard sale, right? So we saw that in a standard sale, if I say I'm selling you a base core, then as long as it's within 1/24th of the total, the deal stands. If it's less than 1/24th, you can demand more land or to pay less money. If it's more than 1/24th, the seller, either can keep some land or demand that you pay me for the extra. Here, if I'm showing you exactly what the piece of land is, so you're completely on notice what the piece of land is. You could measure it for yourself because you see exactly what the boundaries of that field are. So in that situation, instead of 1/24th, the measure is 1/6. We're calling it a base core because it's about the size of a base core, but you can see exactly what it is that you're buying. So as long as it's within 1/6 of a base core, meaning 1/6 more, 1/6 less, so the deal stands. The field is the buyer's and the sale is valid as is. But if the difference is greater, for example, 1/4 or 1/5, right, that's more than 1/6, then until it is calculated at 1/6, the seller must deduct the difference from the purchase price and return money to the buyer. So when they say until 1/6, what they're saying is up to and including 1/6, right? So what they're saying is less than 1/6, it is the buyer's, but if the difference is greater, which includes the 1/6 exactly, so then we get a refund situation. And then the question becomes, are we refunding as much money or as much land as needed to bring it within that 1/6 buffer? Or once we start the process of refunding, we're going to bring it all the way back to exactly a base core? That question is open. Now, Gemara. It was stated that the Amoraim, meaning the sages of the Talmudic period, the Gemara period, as opposed to the Tanaim, who were the sages of the Mishna period, it was stated that the Amoraim disagreed about the following issue. Rav Huna says a difference that is precisely 1/6 is like one that is less than 1/6, and the sale is valid. Now that actually is the law, right? So up to 1/6, there's no refund, the sale stands, and if the difference is exactly 1/6, the sale stands. That's the view of Rav Huna. That became the law. Rav Yehuda, who represents the minority view, says a difference that is precisely 1/6 is like one that is more than 1/6. Meaning if it's more than 1/6, you have to get into a refund situation for that difference to bring it back. And if it's exactly 1/6 difference, Rav Yehuda would liken that to more than a sixth, but that didn't become the law. The Gemara explains the respective reasons for the views of Rav Huna, who says 1/6 is like less than a sixth, and Rav Yehuda, who says that exactly 1/6 is like more than a sixth. Rav Huna says that a difference of 1/6 is like a difference of less than 1/6, as this is what the Mishnah is saying. If the difference is less than 1/6, and including a difference that is precisely 1/6, it is the buyer's, as the sale is valid, and if it is more than 1/6, the seller must deduct the difference from the purchase price. Rav Yehuda says that a difference of 1/6 is like a difference of more than 1/6, as this is what the Mishnah is saying. If the difference is less than a sixth, it is the buyer's and the sale is valid, and if the difference is greater, until it is calculated at 1/6, and including a difference of precisely 1/6, the seller must deduct the difference from the purchase price. Now the Gemara raises an objection to Rav Huna, who would say a difference of exactly 1/6 is like less than 1/6, and therefore the deal stands. The Gemara objects to this statement by saying, there's a baraisa. If one sells a field to another, telling him that he is selling him a field measuring a base core within its particular demarcations and borders, and he gave him a field that is 1/6 less than the measure stipulated, or alternatively, he gave him a field that is 1/6 more than the measure stipulated, it is like a sale of orphan's property that is executed in accordance with, quote, the judge's assessment of the value of that property, and therefore it is the buyer's as the sale is valid. So now the Gemara explains his objection. But in the case of a sale executed in accordance with the judge's assessment, where in other words, the court is administrating property that belongs to orphans, so it's acting like a guardian for the orphans in selling this property, and we're always going to be very careful of the property of orphans. But in the case of a sale executed in accordance with the judge's assessment, an error of precisely 1/6 is like an error of more than 1/6, and the sale is void. And this contradicts Rav Huna's opinion that an error of 1/6 is like an error of less than 1/6. And the Gemara answers its own challenge. Rav Huna could have said to you in reply, even according to your reasoning, there is still a difficulty since the Baraisa teaches that it is the buyer's, i.e., the sale is final. So rather, the comparison drawn between the law in our Mishnah and the judge's assessment is not a general comparison. It is like the judge's assessment, but it is not entirely like the judge's assessment. It is like the judge's assessment in that the limit is 1/6 as opposed to our usual limit of 1/24 when one is selling a base core, where he didn't point out the exact demarcations and measurements. So that's what's like the judge's assessment, that we're using the 1/6 tolerance for error in terms of the total area of the land rather than the 1/24. But it is not like the judge's assessment, as there in the case of the judge's assessment, the sale is voided. No sale at all. While here in our Mishnah, it is the buyer's and the sale is final. So it is related that Rav Papa bought land from a certain man. Now we're on page 106b, who, after specifying its demarcations and boundaries, which brings us into the realm of the 1/6 tolerance rather than the 1/24. Right? So Rav Papa bought land from a certain man, who, after specifying its demarcations and boundaries, said to him, it is an area of 20 griv. That's a word we haven't seen before, but what it means is that this land is fit for planting 20 sa of grain. Now we know that a base core is for planting 30 sa of grain, so this is like 2/3 of a base core. Rav Papa later measured the field, and he found that it was fit for planting only 15 sa. So if you take an outer measurement, the difference between 15 and 20 is 1/4 of the 20. If you do an inner measurement, the difference between 15 and 20, the 5, but if you compare it to 15, it's like 1/3. But whether it's 1/3 or 1/4, it's definitely a larger difference than 1/6. So this should be a situation where Rav Papa either gets a refund of his money or somehow gets more land from the seller. So Rav Papa came before Abaye to sue the seller, right? He brought litigation and he went to Abaye. So Abaye said to him, you knew what you were buying and you accepted the field as is. So now we have a new wrinkle in all of this. Not only if the land is being sold according to demarcations and measurements, now we have a greater tolerance that it can be a difference of up to 1/6, but if the buyer is familiar with the piece of land, and we're going to have to define what familiar means, but if he's familiar with that piece of land, then it seemingly doesn't matter what the difference is. You knew what you were buying. You saw the piece of land. If you don't think it's worth that money, don't buy it. But there's no, there's no misleading the buyer here, because the buyer knew what he was buying. He knew he was familiar with that piece of land. Like, for example, he's selling it to his neighbor. The neighbor knows the field that's right next to his own field. So, of course, he's familiar with it. He's seen what it is. He was told what demarcations is. Okay, so the seller thought that it was of a certain size, certain area. And he said the number, but the buyer knew exactly what he was getting. So, says Abaye to him, you knew what you were buying, and you accepted the field as is. The deal's done. Rav Papa was upset, and he raised an objection to Abaye's ruling from our Mishnah. But didn't we learn in the Mishnah, and we are on page 106b, but didn't we learn in the Mishnah that when the seller specifies the field's demarcations and borders, if the difference between the stated size of the field and its actual size is less than 1/6, the field is the buyer's and the sale is valid, it is. But if the difference is greater, up until 1/6, the seller must deduct the difference from the purchase price. And here in this case, the difference between what the seller promised and the actual size of the field is greater than 1/6. And Abaye replied, that statement applies in a case where the buyer is unfamiliar with the plot being sold to him. But in a case where he is familiar with it, he knew what he was buying, and he accepted it as is. Well, Rav Papa objected again. He said to Abaye, but the seller said to me that the field is fit for planting 20 sa. And it is not. It's only fit for planting 15 sa. And Abaye said to him, what the seller meant was that the field is as good and as fruitful as one that is fit for planting 20 sa. And guess what? The ruling of Abaye stood, and that is the law. So if the seller can prove that the buyer is familiar with the field at the time that he's buying it, like maybe they walked it together in the presence of witnesses and he showed him the demarcations and measurements, maybe even he was more familiar with that, he lived in the town, he was the neighbor, etc., well, then the buyer clearly knew what he was getting. If the buyer was coming in from out of town, maybe he was buying the thing sight unseen, maybe he had the opportunity to send an agent to look at the demarcations and measurements, but he didn't do it himself. Okay, then maybe we're going to stick to the 1/6 tolerance, which is still greater than the 1/24 tolerance. But if the seller can show that the buyer was familiar with it, and the seller said, here are the demarcations and measurements of what I'm selling to you, that's it. The deal stands. And the fact that he gives a measurement like this is a base core, this is like a base core, it's a base core, really only means it's like a base core to me. I feel it's like a base core. I never really actually measured it. I'm just telling you what the land is. And this is the exact boundaries of the land, and the deal stands. That's the law. Familiarity breeds finality. in the land of in the law of purchase and sale when it's demarcated and measured. New subject. It is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yosei says when brothers divide their father's estate between them by lottery, i.e., after dividing the property into equal shares, they draw lots to determine which brother is to receive which parcel of land. Once the lot for one of them is drawn, they all acquire the remainder of the property and they can no longer retract their decision to divide the estate in this manner. It can't be that you're in and you agree to divide it by lot, but then when your brother gets the lot that you want, you're like, you know what, I don't want to do this. No. You already said, okay, we're going to divide up Dad's property that we're inheriting. We're going to make it 3 equal sized pieces. And now we're just going to draw lots to see who gets which piece. As soon as the first lot is drawn, that's it. The system is now in place and the lots are going to be drawn and that's what they're going to end up with. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason for this? Drawing lots is not one of the recognized modes of acquisition. It's not a kinyan. We haven't encountered drawing a lot as a form of kinyan, as an act of formal acquisition. Why is it that when brothers are inheriting from their father and they're going to divide it up by lot, that as soon as one has chosen the lot, as soon as one has drawn the lot, all of them are now committed to this course of action? So Rabbi Elazar said, the law that applies here, very interesting, is similar to the initial division of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, among the tribes. When Joshua led the children of Israel out of the desert into the land, conquered the peoples that were there, were child sacrificing, very bad people. And once those wars were ended, the pieces of land, the regions of Israel, and then within those regions, so they were apportioned by lot among the tribes, and then within each tribe's holding, they were portioned by lot among the families of that tribe. And just as the initial division of Eretz Yisrael was carried out by drawing lots, so too, here, the brothers can divide their father's estate by drawing lots. So the Gemara challenges, if the brothers' division of their father's estate is comparable to the initial division of Eretz Yisrael, an additional comparison should apply. Just as there, the initial division of Eretz Yisrael was carried out through a receptacle in which the lots were placed, and the urim v'tumim. Now that's a whole new wrinkle. The urim v'tumim. So the urim v'tumim was a kind of a hotline to God. Right? There's really no better word for it. So in the days of the temple, of the Holy Temple, I'm not sure if the Urim V'Tumim was still working in the days of the Second Temple, but certainly in the early days of the Mishkan, right? So the first 400 years before David built, or before David chose the location and raised the money, and then Solomon built the first temple. But for 400 years before that, the tabernacle from the wilderness was in the Holy Land. It stood mostly at Shiloh and a few other places. And there, the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, wore the breastplate on which were 12 precious stones symbolizing the 12 tribes of Israel. And then within that breastplate, there was the Urim V'Tumim. So very mysterious. We're not sure exactly how it operated, but it was a way of asking God a question. It was like a way of asking for a prophecy. And it was generally used for, should we go to war against this enemy or not? There were other questions perhaps that could have been asked. That was the usual question that was asked. But here we're also seeing it was used for apportioning the land within Israel. I guess what they said is, okay, which part of the country are we going to divide next? Or are we going to apportion next? And maybe the lot was drawn to say, okay, this area, which now we would call Judea, and which of the tribes is it going to go to? And then the Urim V'Tumim maybe lit up the stone for Judah, and that's why that area became Judea. At any rate, there was a combination of drawing lots and the Urim V'Tumim in the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. So, if we're going to say that we're going to, the reason that brothers have to commit to this process of dividing up their father's land by drawing lots, because lots were drawn when Joshua apportioned the land of Israel among the tribes, well then, don't we also need the Urim V'Tumim? Seems to be what's being asked here. Rav Ashi said, with the satisfaction that each of the brothers receives from the fact that they listen to each other and agree to accept the results of the lottery, they fully transfer ownership to each other. Therefore, the division becomes final as soon as the first lot is drawn. In other words, we don't need Urim V'Tumim because what we do have here is this voluntary commitment of the brothers. This actually happened, in my family. There was an uncle who left some items, some personal items that came, to me and my brother. And so how do we divide? We chose lots, right? So we made a random thing. Maybe it was a coin flip, whatever. But, it's worth saying that when you leave things to a coin flip, when you leave things to drawing lots, really what you're inviting is divine assistance in the outcome. And you should commit, right? And accept the outcome. New subject. It was stated that the Amoraim disagreed about a related issue. If two brothers divided their father's estate between them, and then later a third brother, of whose existence they had previously been unaware, arrived from a country overseas, Rav says the original division of the property is void, and the brothers must now redivide the property among the three of them. And Shmuel says the original division is still valid, but the two brothers must take off a share from their portion and give it to the third brother. The Gemara clarifies the opinions of Rav and Shmuel. Rav is said to Rav Nachman, according to Rav, who says that the division is void, apparently the law is that if a division of property was found to have been performed in error, the original verdict is reconsidered and the entire division is void. So accordingly, in the case of the brother who arrived from overseas, the original division of the father's estate was in error because they didn't know there was a third brother, and so we void that original division. But if that is so, then in the case of these three people who stand as partners, right, this is a business deal, and two of them go and divide the property into three parts without consulting with the third partner, so too the division should be void. And it should be necessary to divide the property a second time between the three partners. But elsewhere, in Tractate Bava Metzia 31b, the Gemara indicates that in such a case, if the division of property took place in the presence of a court, it is valid. Meaning like three partners purchased a piece of land, they co-owned it together when they were renting it out, to some farmer, and then the time came where they didn't want to be partners anymore, so they're going to divide that piece of land into three parcels of land. So do all three have to be present in order to do that? Apparently not. It's enough if two of them are there. What's the difference? Rav Nachman rejects the comparison. How can you compare these cases? It's clearly different. There, in the case of the three partners, they entered the process of dividing the property from the outset with the knowledge that there were three partners. and it was necessary only to clarify which portion was going to go to which partner. Here, in the case of the brother who arrived from overseas, they did not enter the process of dividing the property from the outset with the knowledge that there were three, as at the time of the original division, they thought that there were only two brothers. Totally different situation. I'm so close to done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Rav Papa said to Abaye, according to Shmuel, who says that the two brothers must each take off a share from their portion and give it to the third partner, is this to say that he is of the opinion that even if a division of property was found to have been made in error, the original verdict stands and the division is valid? But don't Rav and Shmuel both say that if the seller said to the buyer, I am selling you 1 kor of grain, an amount equivalent to 30 sa for the sum of 30 sela, he can renege on the entire sale even while measuring out the last sa. But if he said, I am selling you 1 kor of grain for 30 sela, 1 sa per sela, as we were talking about yesterday, the buyer acquires each sa as it is measured out, one by one. And so you cannot renege on the sas, the individual sas that have already been measured out. So the original verdict stands. Why in the first case may the seller renege even on that portion of the sale that already reached the buyer? And the Gemara answers at the top of 107a, the cases cannot be compared because there, in the case of the sale of grain, the sages instituted a matter that is suitable for the seller and also suitable for the buyer. Since the price of grain fluctuates, neither party wants the sale to be considered complete until the last sa is measured out, so that they each are able to renege on the sale should the price rise or fall. And this reasoning does not apply in cases of division of an existing property. That concludes our journey for today. Let me see if I've got any questions or comments that I can take quickly before I rush off to Mincha. Ilanit, thanks Sal for always setting such a great model of learning with zeal and joy, fasting or not, always a true professional. Blessings to AT Daily and all who support it for a great new year. Amen. Thank you so much. And as we say, Hamevorach Yisborach, may the blesser be blessed. And Bill, last question. I seem to recall hearing, but I don't remember where, so take it with salt, that the Urim and Tumim was lost when the first temple was lost. I'm pretty sure that's my recollection as well. So we are remembering the same thing, albeit without 100% certainty. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Monday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a good night.